So I'm insanely optimistic in the face of insanity, do you know? And it's like that Beckett thing. I feel like a total Beckett character right now. You know, I heard a woman from Afghanistan, a wonderful activist, said to live in Afghanistan right now, it's like holding two melons in your hand at the same time. I feel there are many things that lead to the promised land, you know? And some of them are discourse, and some are actions, massive actions that begin to catalyze and shake up and rip open normalcy and begin to question. And if I look at 1 Billion Rising last year, and the people who danced, and the different cultures and the way people dance, and I look at what dancing did for people, women who had never danced in public spaces because they'd been raped, reclaimed public spaces. People danced up new laws. People danced up new vision. People danced up new coalitions. So I've just made a choice to be wildly optimistic because it feels better, you know, and I don't want to be depressed. And I also think that this discussion's happening right now. This discussion is happening everywhere in the world right now. This discussion wasn't happening 10 years ago all the time, everywhere. It's changed. It's changed. And that doesn't mean there isn't misery and suffering and massive rapes and institutionalized patriarchy. But the way it breaks down is through this discourse and by bringing consciousness to it.
Shireen?
I would say that it's sort of in my examination of sexual mores in the Arab region is that change doesn't happen by revolution. It happens by evolution. And that really any change that we're going to see is really, for my part of the world, going to happen over a generation, at least. But in terms of how do we get to the heart of the patriarchy, in my experience in looking at households across the Arab region, to my mind, the key to it is how do women raise their sons? If mothers raise their sons, as they so often do in the Arab region, that their sons are greater than their daughters, that their daughters must serve their sons, that their sons could go out but their daughters must stay at home because we are concerned about her virginity and what happens to that almighty hymen. If their sons can roam freely on the internet but we are policing every page that the daughters watch, then we will see these unequal relations, this violence perpetuated within marriage, out of marriage for years to come. So the heart of it is not necessarily education in the classroom, but it's education in the living room, and it starts with mothers and their sons.
I would like to add fathers, too. I think fathers are a big part of it. Sometimes I feel like we do a lot of blaming of mothers, and not that mothers aren't part of it, but fathers are the role models for their sons. And how fathers behave determines so much of how sons behave. And I think new fathers are beginning to evolve, and I think that will have enormous impact.
Absolutely. And you know, in India, the role or the privilege given to the male child is largely, again, coming out of people's ideas about religion. Largely. So that what goes on in the family in terms of privileging the male over the female, that the girl will only get the leftover food if there is any, or the meat first goes to the boy and then to the child. This is all sort of coming out of some warped idea of organized religion that has taken over the family unit. And so I think that we're again only going to chip away at what the family is doing if we chip away at what organized religion has done to brainwash masses of people into insanity. It's not even rational anymore, you know. It's not religion anymore.
I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Thank you, everyone.
There's a microphone going around. Let's remember to just keep our questions very brief. We have a very limited time. Let's start with the lady there.
What about the role of abuses? What about the role of abuses? Abuses, what we call gali in Hindi.
What's the role of abusers? And who
abuses? Every abuse that I have heard about involves a woman. My husband has a fight with somebody. You have a fight with somebody. His wife is involved. His mother gets involved. His sister gets involved. What about that? So I've heard people say it is cathartic. Giving an abuse causes catharsis. If an abuse causes catharsis, how about the act? Won't the act lead to such catharsis? Why won't the man go ahead and indulge in the act? Tell me that. When you don't stop your sons from abusing people, your husbands. Not that we can stop. I have tried, failed miserably. You just can't stop. It's all around them. They will abuse to their heart's content. And what is it? It is violence, verbal violence that we accept. And I am very sure that this is one of the root causes. You stop this verbal violence, probably at least 10% of the real violence will stop.
Great, thank you. Who wants to answer that?
Let's have a question here.
And just a very quick response to that. You know, I think you put your finger on something that's really important. One of the vehicles of the brutalization and the oppression and discrimination against women is language. And it's not only abuses, but it is the way in which violence and discrimination is institutionalized in language. So it's one of the fronts on which we have to fight.
We have a question from the lady there.
Lots of ladies there.
He's getting there.
Okay.
Hello. Hi, good afternoon. I have two questions basically. Firstly,
Can we choose one just because of time?
all right, fine, no problem. Okay, we have seen cases of Nirbhaya, we have seen cases of the photojournalists in the Shakti Mills. When I go across the newspaper, like say in the past 1 month or 2 months, I've seen so many articles talking about cops who have gang raped a girl. So what my question is that what creates the sensation? Now the cops gang raped the girl. No one knows about it, but then Nirbhaya's case and the photojournalist case, it's like everyone knows about it. So what exactly creates the whole sensation that it sells that way, like the article?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I think that's in some ways connected to how dysfunctional we are, even though we have the trappings of democracy. So we have a system that we call a democracy, but we don't have a judiciary largely that protects our women when they need the protection legally. We don't have police forces that are trained not just to take complaints seriously, but if you saw the way we gather evidence, it's a wonder we get any case convicted. So there's so much infrastructural problem in terms of what we're doing. I think there it's an issue of who controls the power. And I think the media there needs to be as involved in telling those stories as it does to sensationalize stories that also need to be told, but perhaps with equal kind of balance.
I think I would add that if violence against women is naturalized, violence against poor women, low-caste women, minority women is even more naturalized. So it doesn't get talked about. You hardly ever hear of the rape of Dalit women. You hardly ever hear of rape by the army because that's caught in some nationalist frame. So that's the truth of our very hierarchical society.
I have a question here. There was recently a study here.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. There was recently a study that said pornography could deter sexual violence. Do you think it's a rational way to think? Like if you watch porn, it could have a lesser effect. Like people wouldn't go out and rape women, instead watch somebody have sex on the computer screens.
Eve?
Well, I would like to respond to that because I read a study recently that 70% of boys learn about sex from pornography. And I started to think how deeply scary that was, because most pornography is based on incredible inequality and oppression. And again, it goes back to erotica and the need for a different kind of vision of sexuality that is portrayed, which is delicious and loving and mutual. I was doing a project where I was interviewing all these girls in high school about sex and in the United States. And there's this new thing in high school where girls are giving boys oral sex all the time. And I asked the girls, and what do you get in exchange? And they said, what do you mean? It had never occurred to them that sex was about exchange and reciprocity, right? And I think that's because of pornography to a large degree. It's the visuals that men get. And I think my friend was saying to me the other night that men are very, very visual and things get into their heads. And I think a lot of times they're just acting out. It's, I think, the biggest industry in the world right now, pornography. And if you think about the massive consumption of this kind of mentality, Of course it's impacting how men treat women. Of course it is. There's a direct correlation.
Can I? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Just 1 second. How much more time do we have for questions?
About 2 questions.
Okay,
This
great.
one and one more.
Go ahead.
I'm very impressed with a gentleman talking about organized religion. And I've always believed that organized religion is no different from organized crime. Respecting another human being is more important than respecting the other sex. So unless we don't have a law in this country about the misuse of organized religion, at least in India, we're not going to have any solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to
Let's
start
take two
using
more
the organized crime line now because I agree. I think it's... But you see, nobody wants to take on religion because you lose voting blocks. You have people who will come and burn down your establishments if you speak out against religion. So, you know, it's a tough nut to crack.
And I know Shireen wants to respond.
Obviously, it's an issue for us in the Arab region because very often, certainly conservatives use Islam as a tool of repression, and they very often take sex and they wrap it up in religion, and in particular they use it to regulate women. But I think the importance to keep in mind is that religions are very often more flexible and more plastic than we actually give credit for. And we certainly in the Arab world have been increasingly presented because of the rise of Islamic fundamentalism with a monolithic black and white faith, when in reality Islam, in terms of issues to do with sexuality or indeed other aspects of life, has at least 50 shades of gray, I would argue. But it is a very key point for those of us to speak out and to often turn to our religion. Religion can be, at least in the case of Islam, can be a very powerful argument for equal rights, for the enjoyment of sexuality, for sexual rights. But we as moderates need to speak out and reclaim our faith from those who choose to use it to other purposes.
Thank you.
We can have one last question.
A comment and a question. Kezad, again, I have to say on all platforms, being a feminist, that female feticide is a word we are not using because it is anti-abortion, and we have to use the word sex selection, and that is to the media as well. As far as your thing about organized religion is, nobody's taking up. Women's movement is definitely taking up religion, and now as a symbol you have Asaram behind bars, and when one guru has gone behind, there'll be many other following. My question to you is, when we were talking about patriarchy, again you said the mother, can we just stop looking women as a reproducing machine? And also the time has come, shouldn't we question the institution of marriage as well as this whole concept of holier than thou family?
Who would like to take that?
Well, I mean, certainly on the subject of marriage in particular, again, I'm speaking from an Arab perspective. The reason my book is called Sex and the Citadel, that citadel is marriage, that we have no other context for sexual life in the Arab world today other than family-approved, religiously approved, state-sanctioned marriage. And anything else outside of that is haram, it's shameful, we can't even consider it. And so the structure of marriage does impose these limitations. Now the question is, how can we find flexibility? For us in the Arab region, the question for us is, how are we going to find flexibility within that structure? And again, it comes back to Islam. Marriage can be a very flexible instrument in Islam, both men and women. It's just those that in authority, be they religious authorities or governmental authorities, choose not to present that flexibility to the population at large, because it becomes another tool with which to control the people. And by no means do I wish to suggest that women are just there for producing children. No, when I talk about mothers and their sons, I'm also talking about women who have the opportunity, should they choose, to work and to be politically active and economically active.
I just want to speak a little bit to the marriage issue, because I think there are other forms of connection that are evolving throughout the world right now. And they're happening organically. You know, I know a lot of people now who are living in different kinds of arrangements, and a lot of women who are independent. I myself, I can look at my own life where I used to be a couple, and now I'm living as a single woman, and I'm very, very happy. I'm very, very happy. And I think 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. Do you know, to think of myself as an independent woman in the world who had a very good life without being married and coupled. And I think a lot of times we just all need to be questioning institutions to see if they're actually serving us. if they're actually working for our particular needs, or are we just going along with it because we're supposed to? And I think a lot of women end up getting married without going through that thought process. And before they know it, they are captured within an institution which is undermining them and which is making them unequal. And I think that's true everywhere in the world.
Can I add to what Eve is saying? My short answer to your question is yes, basically that. And I just want to say to you that I've been thinking of myself as a single happy woman for 40 years, actually. So it was possible.
Bravo.
And just to wrap up, Shirin.
But I was going to say, I mean, the problem for us in the Arab region is that we don't have a context outside of marriage. If you're a woman who doesn't get married, then you're basically in a state of suspended adolescence. You can't leave your parents' place, you're not supposed to be having sex, and you're definitely not supposed to be having children. But the primacy of marriage is reinforced by the importance of the family, because we don't have structures at the political level that recognize our economic rights or recognize our political rights. And so at the end of the day, the family is the last resort. And for as long as that happens, the women will be trammeled. And so marriage, you're both fortunate you have the alternative. In so many parts of the world, including my part of the world, that opportunity just doesn't exist.
But I think women created that opportunity. I mean, when I grew up, marriage was what we were offered, and the family was it. And I think what feminism did was it got us to really question that and look at that and break out of those forms. And I think that's really what our work is, to say, are these institutions making us equal, serving our dreams, developing our spirits and hearts and souls to their full extent, or are they just things that